Director Daniel Del Vittorio. I've probably butchered that name, but anyway, that guy. He directs Marshmallow, a 2025 science fiction horror movie, which of course takes inspiration from various summer camp horror movies, but I would say more substantially, Stranger Things and The Matrix. So, the story of this one focuses on a young boy called Morgan. And he is a shy, unassuming young boy who is bullied, doesn't really have any friends. He has an irrational fear of water and is plagued by nightmares. And his parents actually sent him to a summer camp. And once there, he does actually make a couple of friends and a kind of even a little potential kind of girlfriend. And the camp counsellors there tell of a story about a doctor that years and years before there was a summer camp did some gnarly experiments, and you know, this scares all the kids quite naturally. But then Morgan and his friends start seeing something. There seems to be a masked figure lurking in the darkness, and there may well be shenanigans at foot. That's all kind of I'll really say, but the only thing from there, that this movie is a kind of a mix between a science fiction and horror movie. It definitely has a horror feel, but I would say it probably airs just as much on the science fiction side of stuff as well. And it is kind of like quite a timely film. Once you've watched the film, without kind of spoiling anything, you'll realise that I think, you know, maybe that this is something like this is where the future could end up. That's all I'll say. Right. Without any spoilers, let's talk about it. What do I think works? This was a great movie. A great movie. And I don't think it's helped by a generic title. I kind of get why they were called it that, but it really doesn't do this movie any favours. So ignore the title. And what can I say to you that would make you want to go and see this? Okay. So as much as you kind of fell in love with the kids from Stranger Things and you kind of was rooting for them, you'll get behind the cast, this young cast of the actors in this movie. They are just as kind of like an interesting group of kids and good acting and likeable characters and as charismatic as the cast of Stranger Things. It really does have a Stranger Things vibe to it. This kind of group of young kind of misfits ultimately that kind of band together to try and, you know, fight against this force that is trying to do things. And it ultimately really has that feel to it. And it even has a kind of a synth heavy soundtrack, although it's not set in the 80s, it's actually set, you know, in an indiscriminate time period, but it's certainly at least modern day or possibly in the future. But it definitely has that sort of Stranger Things feel to it. But again, I'm going to say here, the acting from these young kids, especially the little boy who plays Morgan, is fantastic. Really, really strong. I mean, I would keep an eye out for this. It's so well cast. These kids are so good. Having watched, you know, a lot of movies, it's very impressive, the acting here. Really, really strong. And you know, well-written characters as well. So it's the acting plus the kind of the way these characters are portrayed and written and directed makes them so watchable. The movie's actually quite clever. Again, I'm going to be vague, but as the film goes on, you know, it will change your ideas about what's happening. And the movie is deliberately vague. You do kind of get the explainathon as the kind of the movie draws to its close. But it's quite clever, I have to say. You know, I think it's certainly a very interesting premise, and dare I say it's quite original, albeit it's taking elements from The Matrix, Stranger Things, and kind of, as I say, various summer camp themed horror movies. You know, again, I don't want to go into any more detail than that. And you won't really understand the Matrix reference until the very, very end of this movie. But yeah, it's quite an original idea. I mean, we've seen similar things, but I think the actual the out and out premise of this one is fairly original, and it's a movie where you can think, do you know what? I can kind of see something like this. Let me give you a kind of an idea about what I mean. If you've ever watched, when you were young, if you're my age and you've ever watched the old original Star Trek series, and they had like the communicators, and you know, back then when that was made, you'd think, oh, that was science fiction. You know, that was like just some grand idea, and obviously cut to now modern times with you know, modern cell phones and stuff, where that really is a reality. That's kind of what I'm thinking here. It's sort of almost you can see things that are shown in this movie, and you think, do you know what? It might seem far-fetched now, but something like this, you can kind of possibly see happening down the road. And you know, it's quite interesting in that fact, and I think it almost asks some moral questions of the audience, which I think is an interesting idea here. And you know, it's quite fascinating, I have to say. I think, you know, on a technical level, it's shot very well. It's quite moody. We have these kind of like these a masked individual or individuals that are kind of look quite menacing. There are a couple of scenes of kind of gore here, and it certainly has a kind of horror aesthetic, but certainly some strong science fiction ideas as well. And overall, it's just a good story. Do I have any critiques? So this is one of these movies, and they can't help themselves, unfortunately. So the one major critic I will have of this movie is it just can't help itself to after this, you know, we have the kind of the end of the third act where things are revealed, and then it can't help itself in the last couple of minutes to have another kind of curveball thrown in, and it's just like it's too late to the end, really, for that to be explored. I actually wish they didn't do that, or introduced it earlier on, because I think that sort of the very final kind of reveal, it's just like, that was a bad move, I have to say. It doesn't spoil the movie, and it's actually something really in addition to the story as a main, but it's kind of like, I think that was a bad decision to have that in there, I've got to say. And also I think it's, again, the third act, but maybe preceding that very final scene, when we kind of learn about what's actually kind of going on, you'll have some questions, I feel, about stuff, maybe, you know, methods, technology, even kind of like how things like this are governed, and it's not really answered. You'll just get the kind of the bare minimum of like the how, but not necessarily the why or the kind of the detail about it. So I do feel it's enough to kind of get you the idea about what's going on, but you feel that there's questions left on the table here, which I think would have been fine, generally speaking. But I do think it's kind of like, well, this leaves me a lot of questions, and if you could have scratched the surface too hard, you might, you know, think, you know, I feel like I would want to know more about this, because, you know, it just doesn't seem something that you can kind of introduce in an exposition done without leaving you with some questions. Again, vague, I know, but, you know, I want you to enjoy this movie for what it is. And it is a good movie. I would strongly suggest checking it out. I'll give it an 8 out of 10, marred only slightly by its exposition and the very final conclusion to it. But an 8 out of 10. Have you seen it? What were your thoughts? Please do let me know, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.